Hey, Buddy Manning here. Welcome to a Friday edition of the Garden Report as Celtics-Pacers turns to Indiana. Some massive series changes here, Brian Barrett, as we welcome you back in to the show here. Celtics finally went small. They pulled away with a runaway victory. Not an overwhelming blowout here, but a strong second half to put away. It was a pretty good first half effort from the Pacers, from Siakam, who's on fire right now. And some injuries here as well that might play a factor in this series. A big one on the Indiana side with Tyrese Halliburton suffering a hamstring injury on the same side as one that knocked him out for a long period of time earlier in the season. And for the Celtics, not a monumental one, but with Kristaps Porzingis still down, losing another big and Luke Kornet could potentially play an impact on them so far here. So what are your thoughts from game 2 here and where the events of last night put this series now?
Well, from a blowout game, there's so many interesting storylines, right? First of all, Rick Carlisle thought it was a blowout because he yanked his guys with 9 minutes left, and they were only down 15. And I get Halliburton was already out at that point. You have the number one offense in the NBA, and you're just throwing in the towel. I thought that, quite frankly, from Carlisle's perspective, was pathetic. And this is coming off him admitting that he essentially blew game 1. I would doubt it that Halliburton's ever going to come back in this series, considering the fact that Woj is already reporting that they're concerned about game 3. It's a hamstring. Second time he's been dealing this, as you alluded to. So this appears, unless the Celtics really royally screw something up in Indiana, that this series is over. But the biggest thing to me is what you mentioned. They finally went small because, and here's the most interesting thing about that, because the numbers are awesome, right? You look at the numbers with Brissett on the floor, plus 18, which was tied with Jaylen Brown, who had 40 points. Jaylen Brown had arguably his best postseason game of his entire career. And the guy that played 12 minutes had the same plus minus because it was really easy to see. They were just switching everything defensively, right? I mean, there was one point in the game where there was an off-ball switch with Brissett, and he just jumped right in front of Miles Turner, so they couldn't make a pass to Turner. They ended up not scoring on that particular possession. There was twice on back-to-back possessions where they had a switch with Halliburton. Those were empty possessions for the Pacers. And it's not a coincidence that the two biggest Celtics runs of the game, Brissett was part of both of those. And the thing, I'm very happy the Celtics are up 2-0. It looks like they're on their way back for their second appearance in the finals in the past 3 seasons, which is awesome, especially for these core guys. The one thing that concerns me is I've been calling this for a while. I'm sure, Bobby, you've thought about it. Everybody was asking Joe Mazzulla about it in between games. Are you actually going to go small? It took an injury for it to happen. So if Kornet never hurts his wrist, we probably don't even see Brissett in the game, which to me, if you're sort of thinking about the next series, right? I'm not saying that specific alignment is something you need. I'm just thinking about the next series. That worries me a little bit because remember last year we had these discussions all the time. There was an obvious thing that wasn't happening. Like, why isn't Derek White closing games? He's just a far superior player to Marcus Smart. And I get maybe during the regular season you don't want to ruffle feathers, but if you have to make that critical decision, will you make the right one or the obvious one? I know Joe likes to play big, and it feels like and I've defended Joe on multiple occasions. I think he's an outstanding coach, but one of his faults is he is sort of stubborn. Like after watching Kornet play in game 1, probably shouldn't have played. He probably shouldn't have been in the rotation to start game 2. And the other thing I'd say, Bobby, is you know what else this does? It takes minutes off Al, where Al doesn't have to switch all the time. Like he was playing 36 minutes, 35 minutes and switching on defense, and teams are leaving him on offense. This just gives you another option.
Yeah, and there were certainly some mistakes on Boston's end, including that in game 1 that almost cost them. It's amazing how that game 1 and what happened in the final minutes there completely changed the complexion of the series. There would have been a series at that point with the Celtics losing at home and doing it in that fashion, adding some belief to the Pacers. They've certainly faded quite a bit by now, as you mentioned, with some of the decisions they've made there going into game 3. So it's interesting with the big man stuff there because Joe even said after the game, like they thought they might get to small ball at some point, but it wasn't going to be this soon before Kornet got hurt there, which is unbelievable. Like, and I'm the king. You know, I'm the president of the Kornet fan club. I think he's been great in this postseason relative to expectation, but it's all about matchups. And Joe would even say as such, like, this just isn't a Cornet series. When you think about the speed, the perimeter game that Indiana plays, how downhill they are out of those actions, like they're just trying to make him move. And, there were some possessions last night where I thought he moved pretty well. There was one stop where they took it down to the shot clock. And so I get that they want to maintain belief in a guy like that and not just take him out and go to a guy like Tillman, who hasn't been exceptional defensively either in the spots that we've seen him, and we haven't seen him at much this postseason either. But Brissett was so obvious, and we were all saying it because it allows you to go small, because he's such a good rebounder. He has some perimeter capabilities defensively too against smaller guys that I think bode well to him succeeding out there, and we saw it. But the biggest thing is he knows these guys. And this isn't just like he was in Indiana last year and had a cup of coffee there and then was on to here. He was there for 3 seasons. And so intimate knowledge of what they want to do, those guys' tendencies. I think you saw it come into play on the play you mentioned there against Turner. It's just sitting there for you. I even went up to O'Shea before game 1 and was like, are you guys talking about maybe you having a role in the series? And he was just like, nah, no conversations like that. Here he comes off the bench in game 2 after not playing real minutes since April. And he was great. He looked comfortable out there. And those were his first real playoff minutes too, which was extra impressive.
Yeah, and the other interesting dynamic to it is on the flip side, you look at what Indiana does well. It's not like they're going to post up Miles Turner, right? So, hey, if you think because they're playing a switching scheme, your fear is, hey, Miles Turner's going to kill us on post-ups. First of all, that's just not the reality of what's going to happen. Indiana doesn't want to play this way. Rick Carlisle famously said when he had Porzingis in Dallas that the post-up was an inefficient play. Now, in his defense at that time, it was inefficient for Porzingis, but they weren't doing it like the Celtics are doing it now. When Porzingis posts, it's against smaller defenders. He's not posting up Joel Embiid, right? I mean, he's posted up smaller defenders on mismatches. But the point being is Carlisle wants to play fast. They're the fastest half-court pace team in the NBA. They don't want to play post-ups. The only guy they really post up would be Siakam, but he likes to operate out of the free throw area anyway. So it's not even like they can take advantage of you, right? They literally can't take advantage of you playing a small lineup. And the most jarring thing or the weirdest decision about this whole thing is if you go back to the first game 1, second half, who did Jason Tatum start the second half on? They put him on Turner because Turner was destroying them in that pick and pop game, that pick and roll game. So they said, hey, let's put Tatum on this. It'll make that a better matchup. So they already felt comfortable putting Tatum or at least having Tatum guard the opponent's 5. So that should have told you prior to game 2, hey, let's go to an all switching scheme. So it just, and look, I know that I'm harping on this a lot, but I would have even tried it. I said it during the Cleveland series, just because the only big they were playing was Mobley. He can't play the entire game. You're really scared of Tristan Thompson coming off the bench. I just feel like, and look, maybe part of it is they didn't play a lot of Tatum at the 5 during the regular season. I said a couple of times during the year, might as well try this out. You're going to win the East by 1 million games. Might as well try some of this stuff out. So hopefully now that they've done it, I can't see how you can't go back, especially with Cornet's status. But we'll see in game 3. We better see a lot of, I almost said Jacoby Brissett, a lot of O'Shea Brissett. And we're not just saying this because he's a Cuse guy, Bobby.
Yes, and I went to Syracuse with him. I'm thrilled for him. It's really cool that he's here for this run on the Celtics and could potentially win a championship with the Celtics. I was very excited to watch that last night. Good reserve player, good pickup from the offseason, an underrated one too. And he made an impact last night and will have to going forward because there's pressure on that front court spot. And it's going to be interesting going into the finals too, against the potential front courts you could see there. Rudy and Towns, that's a load there in terms of going up against those guys and trying to figure out what matchups work best against them. And we've seen Dallas's front court obliterate teams that try to play on the smaller side or maybe have a deficiency inside like Oklahoma City did there. So there's some real talent at center in the finals that could pose challenges against the Celtics, especially if Porzingis is limited or takes a little longer to get back here. I still see the reporting being that they might try to get him into the series here as early as game 4, which is good because he probably needs that little ramp up. So at that point, you're not too worried about the front court. Porzingis will take the brunt of those minutes. he can match up with all those different guys we mentioned there. And then Horford's much better in the low-minute reserve role, as we've seen at this point. And then you don't have to worry about the Brissetts and Tillmans and Cornets of the world at that point. But for now, where you don't have Porzingis, it's crucial to keep those Horford minutes down. You just see that he's going to hold up better when you have him in the 25 to 30-minute range rather than 39 like he was at again in game one, doing part to overtime. Every other day series, it's important too. And you just got to see what you have in all these different guys. And I'm not going to go the Keita route like some people do. I don't think you're going to see him at all in these playoffs. But Brissett, what can you get out of him? Tillman, what can you get out of him? You want to see this stuff. And even back to the regular season, like it didn't feel like they went to those looks enough. They didn't even go to small ball at all during the regular season. It looked like they just rolled it out last night and it worked. But you didn't try it or get those reps during the regular season. I think they had less than like 10 minutes combined with Tatum center, Brissett center, centerless lineups.
Well, and the shocking thing about that, the fact that they didn't go to it during the regular season, is it's twofold. Think about how often Porzingis was out of the lineup, right? He had one stretch where he missed an extended period of time, and there was other times where they gave him games off. And Al Horford all season didn't play in back-to-backs. So I don't know the number off the top of my head, Bobby, but there was a ton of games where you either had just Al or just Porzingis. And I understand at that point you had Cornet. And I'm a Cornet guy. I thought he had an outstanding season. He brings a lot to the table as it pertains to offensive rebounding. And I know at one point Keita had this stretch where he was amazing. You wanted to see what you had with Tillman post-All-Star or post-trading deadline, I should say. But it felt like you had plenty of opportunities throughout the season to say, why don't we just try this out to see what it looks like, right? And that's the one thing that I just truly don't understand, especially with the way that the season went. It'd be one thing if like Al and Porzingis each, which you didn't want this to happen, but if they both played 76 games, you'd be like, oh, I kind of get why they didn't go small ball very often, or at least try it. But the way that the season played out, you had opportunities. And the one other thing to piggyback off what you said about Porzingis, I'm with you, man, in terms of if he's good to go. And like, obviously, I don't know exactly it. Like Woj reported that game 4 could be his opportunity. Well, that may be the last game of the series. So I just want him to sort of work up a lather and get out there, because it's going to be tough to bring him back for finals, whether it's Dallas or Minnesota. I think it's going to be Dallas, but it's going to be difficult to bring him back in that setting after not playing for so long. Like, hey, you've been out for a month. Here you go. Here's Daniel Gafford rolling to the basket. Here's Derek Lively rolling to the basket. Oh, here's a Luka Doncic in a pick and roll situation. Here is Kyrie Irving trying to get you involved in the matchup, right? So I just feel like, and I know it'd only be one game, but at least he'd be out there in a competitive basketball atmosphere. At the same point, though, like if they don't think he's ready, obviously you can't play him. My hope would be that we see him in game 4, just to feel like, okay, because at that point, at least we'll know a little bit like what he looks like. If we don't see him until the finals, you'll still have that in the back of your head, like, how's he going to look? Is he going to look okay?
Yeah, for sure. And you want to be on the cautious side, too, if there's risk of re-injury. And there'll be plenty of time for a million practices between these series if they do wrap this up in 4, given that the finals start on like June 6th, 2 weeks from now, whatever it's going to be. So it could be another massive layoff for this team if they do take care of business. I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/CLNS. Use the code CLNS for 100% deposit match up to $100. Our official daily fantasy sports partner here at CLNS Media. Pick 2 players, pick more or less on their stat projections, and you're off. It's that easy. Go to the Game Time app, Game 3. If you're out in Indy, go get your tickets. Download the app, create an account, use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Of course, terms apply, and it's golf season. Great time to get out there on the course, and PXG's got the gear for it, the hats, the polos, the tees, anything you need for the course, along with all their golf gear over there. But use Garn Report and get a checkout on all apparel, 10% discount at checkout on all apparel at pxg.com/Garn Report. So we talked Porzingis in the front court. When it goes for that guard dynamic, for the wing dynamic right now on this team, obviously Tatum got going a little bit in the second half there, but it's still what did he start this game? Like 2 for 8, 2 for 9. The shooting just still isn't there right now, especially from 3. He's still taking a lot of those pull-up jumpers that just aren't there for him right now. And he's going through it, at least from a scoring standpoint. And it impacted his defense in the first half. You saw it. Brown got hot pretty quickly, and I'll give them credit. I'll give Tatum credit for deferring to him. And so they had the ball in his hands for that third quarter that really swung the game, Brown. And he's just been outstanding. Like, if he doesn't win East Finals MVP as this dynamic continues here, I don't know what to say. Like, are they just going to hand Tatum the courtesy thing that they always do with those kind of awards? That would drive me crazy because it's been Brown driving this. And I'm not going to do the perk thing and, that whole thing about, like, is this Brown's team? Is he the best player at this point? Because we understand the responsibility that's in Tatum's hands and how that sets up Brown to do what he does here. But it feels like at some point, Tatum's shooting 40% and really struggling to get his shot off and figuring out what his spot is on the floor. Really, I think the story of this postseason for him, Brian, has been like, who is he as a player? Like, is he going to be the do-it-all guy, master of none? Or is he going to be the guy where scoring dictates the kind of games he has? And he's kind of veered between those two things, pretty much gained the game this whole postseason. And so they've gotten by to this point. They've gotten a lot of breaks. It's unbelievable to think that the other team's best player could be going down for the third straight round here. But you have to think in the finals, you're going to actually need Tatum playing at his highest level for them to get it done. Maybe they won't, because you're not seeing Denver at this point. But that dynamic to me is still so interesting here. Like, can Brown just really carry this mantle here the rest of the way and just have Tatum do all the little things?
Well, it's interesting. And by the way, Perk is talking himself into a pretzel. I don't know why this is now a conversation, the Jalen versus Tatum thing. I was just watching the show on ESPN. What's it called again? It's not The Jump anymore. I forget the name of the show. No, the All NBA show. It's on
NBA Today.
Yes, NBA Today. And Perk is like, he's got this big bold take that Jalen is now better than Jason Tatum. And then later on, they're talking about Jalen and the potential snub that he should have made third team. And Perk admits he didn't vote for Jalen. And then he said, but who are you going to take off? I'm like, well, you have Tatum on the first team. And you just said that Jalen's better than Tatum. So that was just hilarious to me. But anyway, just in terms of the Tatum, first of all, I just want to say Jalen, that 40-point, he's on an absolute tear. He's scoring at the rim at will. He's scoring at the paint at will. He's scoring in transition. It is absolutely ridiculous the way that Jaylen Brown is playing. Like, I thought post All-Star break, Bobby, was the best stretch of his career. And now I would say he's gone to a completely new level as it pertains to that. Like, this is the best basketball he's ever played. With Tatum, you pointed out the aggravating thing to me about his first half performance was he let the shooting struggles affect him. Because I had sort of been pointing out the fact that, well, he's been rebounding the ball well. He's been playmaking. His job is harder than Jalen's on the offensive end because he has to initiate so much of the offense. He's been great as a screener. The issue I have is the early shot clock pull-ups, right? Or the early shot clock step backs. And it's weird because if you look at the last 46 games of the regular season, his pull-up numbers, he's north of 38% on threes. He can't hit pull-ups in the postseason. Same thing happened last year. I guess the scarier part would be entering the game last night. I haven't looked at the tracking data today, but he had been 3 of 18 on catch and shoot threes, which that is just sort of alarming. I mean, those are the ones he was way north of 40%.
Is he just not a good 3-point shooter or a consistent
I thought he had turned a corner, right? I thought he had turned a corner this season, but I don't know, man. Sometimes I feel like he's almost, and I know he's done a ton of work with Hanlon. I think he's like sometimes too robotic because there's so many good things he gets to offensively when him and Derek White are involved in screening action. It feels like he gets good shots against these mismatches. When he got going in the second half is when he got the smaller defenders on him. So I just wish that he could sort of cut back on his 3-point diet right now. Like, he's taken bad shots, and obviously, like, this is the most obvious point. They need a better version of Tatum in terms of what they're going to do in the next round if they're going to actually win an NBA Finals. But I expect at some point, like, it's just the dam's going to open, right? Like, he can't shoot this poorly for an entire playoffs, right? It's just impossible to think that could actually happen. Now, the one thing he was doing against Cleveland was getting to the free throw line. That's another thing where he wasn't engaged last night. In the first half, he wasn't getting to the free throw line. So I think that's something he can get back to as well. But I would just like the diet to change a little bit in terms of the shots he's taking.
Yeah, and they're going to need it. They got to figure out what's going on there. And I know they're okay with the current dynamic, but I just don't think it's sustainable if you're going to go against a team that's playing at the highest level in the finals. And we'll see who that is. We'll see what's left from that West Finals. That's going to be a battle. I know you said you have Dallas coming out of it. I still think we see 6 or 7 games in those West Finals out there. Those are 2 high-level teams, and I think the Wolves are pretty heavy favorites again tonight. I think 5.5. So we'll see what happens out there. I guess we can focus a little bit on Dallas since you think it's going to be them. And I do think that's a fascinating matchup with the Kyrie thing, the Tatum versus Luka thing, and the front court just being massively better there in Dallas than it's been in the past. They're a really interesting team because it looked like they could be this competitive team in the West. I give them an ability to win any series just because of Luka and how dynamic he is. But they've just sort of rolled to this West Finals, and then to roll through Minnesota on the road the way they did in Game 1, Kyrie doing what he did there in the first half. He's a whole different guy this time around, and that would obviously be the big story going into a Dallas-Boston Finals. What kind of threat do you think they would present to Boston if that's where we're headed?
A real threat. I will say this, though. I feel like the Celtics dodged their toughest matchup with Jokic being knocked out because the Celtics,
no doubt.
Right? Like, they don't have a good matchup for Jokic. If you look at the tracking data, he killed Porzingis, he killed Al, right? Like, they just don't have a good matchup for him. And as great as Luka is, like, and Luka will have big games in the NBA Finals, the Celtics probably have one of the best defenders in the league to guard him in Jaylen Brown, right? I mean, we saw Jaylen, like, I know that in the last game he had the 30-plus points, but he did it on, like, 30 shots and 11 free throw attempts, right? So Luka was inefficient, and Jaylen was actually better offensively, right? He actually dropped Luka in that game. So I'm not saying he's going to shut him down for a series, but he's a legit defender on Luka. When you look at the flip side, if you had gotten Denver, you don't have a matchup for him. I do think that Kyrie, obviously, that would be just a fascinating – I can't believe we're here with Kyrie. After everything that's transpired with him since he left the Celtics, I can't believe he's in this position, and I give him credit. I can't believe I'm saying this. He's been outstanding. I just look at Dallas, and I don't think that the way that they won Game 1, they could never play that way against the Celtics, where they dared Minnesota to shoot, right? They said Minnesota took their most threes, I think in the entire season, but definitely in the postseason. And they were hitting a lot of them in the first half, but they said, hey, let's play the numbers. Well, if it's the Celtics and you have Kristaps Porzingis healthy, and you have, or at least back in the lineup in some capacity, you have Jaylen, and I know Tatum's not shooting it well, but Drew and Derek White, you cannot play that way. You can't just surrender 3-point shots to those guys. I think it'd be an awfully difficult matchup in terms of just what Luka can do, because he's so good in the pick and roll, keeping the defender on his back, and then that little floater game he has. I do think they have really good personnel, obviously, for Kyrie. Kyrie, outside of that one game, the Game 1 that the Celtics beat the Nets, remember that, where they had the buzzer beater from Tatum, Smart to Tatum? He was awesome in that game. After that, like, he really hasn't played well against the Celtics. And obviously he's on a great stretch right now, but I think they have multiple guys, Derek White, Drew Holiday, that they could throw on Kyrie Irving. I would take the Celtics to win that series. I said before the playoffs, I would take the Celtics to beat anybody out of the West besides Denver. I feel like Minnesota would be an easier matchup for the Celtics because I know they have the size and all that.
There's a physicality with their defense that interests me. Like, they can batter
Minnesota?
you. Yeah, especially with the new way they're calling the game.
That's true. Very true. I just think on the flip side, offensively, they don't have enough playmaking.
Right.
That they could, like, Mike Conley can set the table, but you're not scared of him as a scorer, right? And we saw Anthony Edwards. He had a really difficult time against that. And really, if you look at his last 4 games, he's averaging 20 a game, and he's shooting 34% from the floor and 33% from deep. His teams have just decided, hey, we're going to load up on him. And he will be a great playmaker in his career, and he does rack up some assist numbers, but he's not a great passer at this point in time. And, like, think about the maturation of Tatum. Like, the way that Tatum is playing, and I know we just talked about how poorly he's shooting the ball, but the reads that Tatum makes, the passes Tatum makes, these are passes he didn't have earlier in his career. Like, when he can throw it from the right wing to the left corner, or he has that whip pass where he comes off a screen on the right and throws it back to the left wing. These are things that he didn't have at the beginning of his career, even 2 years ago.
I get caught up on the Tatum stuff because, listen, I think all the criticism's fair, but it goes to another level where you have those couple Edwards weeks, and it's like, ooh, here comes Edwards to get Tatum. And it's like, he's 22, and I know he's ahead of schedule here, but this is kind of the bump in the road you hit, the wall you hit when you're 22 and you're on the cusp of a championship. Guys just don't do it at that age, and some of the limitations in his game right now are a reason why Minnesota probably can't win a title right now.
Yeah, well, and the other component is Tatum at 23, he was not good against the Warriors in the finals, but he did destroy Kevin Durant. The same thing that Anthony Edwards did, except if you go back, he held Durant to 3 of 18 shooting as the primary defender, and he swept Durant. And they made it all the way to the NBA Finals before, of course, he didn't have a good series. But it's almost like Tatum, because he had so much success early, he isn't allowed like the maturation process that all these, like, I think people assume he's 28 or 29 years old. But like, if you look at the history of the league, Steph Curry won at 26, Giannis won at 26, Jordan won at 27, LeBron won at 27. This is sort of the order of operations. Like, this team, to their credit, was ahead of schedule. I'm not saying that it's an excuse this year if they don't win a championship. Like, Tatum will deserve it. If they don't win it, it'll be partially because Tatum didn't perform, right? So he'll deserve that criticism. But it's almost like Anthony Edwards, the comparisons were crazy. It was Dwayne Wade, and then it was like, wait, hold on. Let's go another level with Michael Jordan. I'm like, what? And then, like, the debate, who would you rather take in the series, Luka or Anthony? Who's the best player in the series, Luka or Anthony Edwards? I'm like, Luka Doncic is a 5-time All-NBA first-teamer. And we're now saying that Anthony Edwards, because he beat a Suns team that was a complete mess that fired its coach, and then they beat a Denver team. I give them a ton of credit for that, but that team was incredibly arrogant with their approach to the season. They just thought their young guys are going to be good. They had no depth whatsoever on that team, and the reason that team was fatigued is because those guys are playing way too much. Jokic playing 76 games, 47 minutes in a game 7. Like, that's a very impressive win for Minnesota, but we're acting like they had already, like, Anthony Edwards had already arrived. Like, and he had done more than Jason Tatum and Luka Doncic combined. Like, we saw Luka a couple of years ago carry that Dallas team to Western Conference Finals. Remember, he took out Phoenix, the champs from the previous year.
Right. Yeah, it's funny to think, as you say, that Minnesota delivered Boston its last championship with the KG trade. If they deliver another one here by beating Denver, that's going to be pretty funny. But I'll take either of these matchups. Yeah. I'm excited for the weeks ahead here. Finals, there's nothing like it. Celtics look like they're on the verge of it. We'll talk about it more later with Brian Barrett, but appreciate him stopping by here today. I'm off to Fenway tonight, Brian, for the first time this series, so we'll see what that brings me.
Little Sox Brewers, Cutter Crawford on the mound.
Yeah, I'll take it. They've been competitive. It's all I can ask for, I guess, right now. So I'm going to stop by and see what the park's looking like. Appreciate it, Brian. Always great to talk to you. Check out his Off the Pike podcast over there on the Ringer as he continues to cover the Celtics playoff run here, and probably a little Red Sox this summer too if they're able to stay in the race. Thanks to everybody for being here. We're off to Indiana for Game 3, so we'll see you out there tomorrow with coverage of Game 3 before and after the game here on CLNS Media and the Garden Report. We'll talk to you then.